Welcome to another episode of Unconditional with Norbie Schickel. It is so good to be back. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and Happy New Year. I hope you had an amazing holiday. Took some time off, and I had a great holiday. Just great. Got an opportunity to see some people that I haven't seen in a while. Had some family come down from Maine, and they escaped the tundra-like conditions of Maine. I can't imagine how cold it is. Just can't imagine. I grew up in upstate New York, and even for me, it's cold. But it had a really, really good chance to see some people that I haven't seen in a while, some family, get the kids together. And that's really, really what it's about, at least for me in the holidays. So it was just fantastic. But I am very glad to be back in front of the microphone, back at Unconditional. If you are new to the podcast, welcome. I'm very glad to have you. If you are a friend, if you've been with us before, it's good to have you back too, especially in this new year. The time of resolutions. Or maybe those resolutions have never got off the ground, or maybe they're already over. Either way, it's all good. Today, I've got an exciting topic, and I'd like to talk about something that maybe you've heard of, maybe many of you are considering, and that's the subject of dry January. Okay, cutting alcohol for the month of January. And if you're unfamiliar, dry January is simply a significant reduction or maybe even an elimination of alcohol for the month of January. Okay, it's a good challenge, a good reset. Lots of people have considered it, lots of people have done it, and lots of people are doing it. And in light of the timing, in light of the new year, and my own personal experience with alcohol, I'd like to share some thoughts on this subject. Okay, I want to weigh in and discuss some ideas, some personal experiences on the subject, and offer some things that I think might be helpful to some people who either are doing it or are considering doing it. Okay, at this point in time, I'm going to go ahead and just say it. So we're not going to bury the punchline here, but I am 2 years, sober at this point in time. And when I say sober, I just have to immediately caveat. Okay, I say sober because I mean that I have cut alcohol. But I, like many who are probably listening to this podcast or who are considering a dry January, we're squarely in the camp of low to moderate consumption. Okay, I'm not talking about what we might call an alcoholic, right? Or somebody who has an alcohol problem. Okay, I am talking about what probably most of us who are my age or older have assumed or understood to be a healthy relationship with alcohol. Okay, low to moderate consumption. Now, that's an important thing to say right off the bat. Okay, if you are in the situation of, or you are thinking for a friend or a loved one, somebody who is squarely in the camp of alcoholic, right? What we might describe as an alcoholic, somebody who maybe is experiencing some significant challenges in terms of being able to cut back on alcohol. Maybe it's significantly impacting their ability to go through life, to hold down a job, right? Any of these considerations. This isn't what I'm referring to. Okay, what I'm referring to is what I think most of us have understood, and now I'm kind of chuckling because it seems cartoonish to me, have understood to be a healthy level of alcohol consumption. We'll get into why I'm chuckling about that. But that's really what I'm talking about here. And it's been 2 years for me since I have cut out alcohol from my life. It didn't start specifically as a dry January, but it started around January. So I want to share. And in light of that, I want to share first what convinced me to quit drinking alcohol when I didn't have a problem. Okay, when I had what was described, and probably by many even today, would be described as a healthy relationship with alcohol. Secondly, although I wasn't an alcoholic, and I did and still do enjoy the taste and the feeling of alcohol, we're going to talk about how I quit drinking. I want to share an incredibly effective approach that I've used to eliminate a number of bad habits throughout my life. And bad habits might be a strong word, but habits that I would prefer not to have, okay, specifically around alcohol, around certain foods that I'm trying to eliminate from my diet, I found this technique to be incredibly effective. I don't know where it came from. I probably didn't invent it, but I would like to share it today. And of course, we're going to talk about the results, the benefits, and some of the not so great aspects of cutting alcohol. But I want to give you a very open, a very honest conversation. And at 2 years in at this point in time, and I'm not suggesting that your path is a 2-year path. It may not even be a 2-week path. Okay. But I'd like to share with you some of the benefits that I personally have received, some of the good, some of the bad, some of the in between. Okay. And that would range from everything from health implications to social implications. Okay. There's a lot that can be rolled into this conversation. As always, the context matters. Okay. Why is this subject important? And why is it somewhat difficult to talk about? Now, we're going to go into definitions here in a moment, but I'll go ahead and emphasize that we're not talking about alcoholics. Okay? We're not talking about large amounts of alcohol. To me, that's a different beast. What we're talking about here is low to moderate chronic consumption of alcohol. Okay? Like me, the habitual consumer. And let's go ahead and say it. Most adult Americans today. We're also not talking about the occasional drink at a wedding or a birthday or on New Year's here. Okay, we're talking about what I think it's fair to describe as the majority of the American adult population today who, like me, consumed alcohol regularly, not to excess, not to obvious detriment to my life or to my family obligations or my job, anything like that, right? Not brown paper bagging it under a bridge somewhere. Okay, and this is very important to emphasize because, like me, you may be under the impression, either were or are under the impression, that some alcohol is actually good for you. Okay, this is something that many of us, my age and older, have heard for a long time, that maybe a glass of wine at night is actually a good thing, right? You may be familiar with terms like the hormetic effect, the idea that taking a small amount of a toxin, small amount of a poison, might actually be good for you. If you think about the analogy of working out, you break down the muscle, right? You stress the muscle in order for the muscle to grow. So whether it's from the resveratrol or whether it's from the hormetic effect, or maybe it's good for the heart, right? These are all ideas that have been thrown out there from the topic of alcohol, and we're going to discuss them today. And again, this is in the low to moderate category. The other reason why this conversation is difficult is that alcohol serves an important social function. Okay? At least as of the time of this recording, January 2026, we still live in a world in which moderate alcohol consumption is normal. Okay? It's accepted, and it is built into the fabric of so much of our social lives, right? Going to a bar, watching a game, going to a barbecue, holiday get-togethers, okay? Going on a date. I don't need to belabor the point here, but so many of our rituals as a society, of our celebrations as a society, are built around sharing a drink. And alcohol will make a good time, if done in moderation and if done rightly, will make a good time even better. I mean, I just don't think that there's any denying that. And for most people, myself included, the feeling of slight intoxication is quite nice. Okay? It's pleasant, sort of smooths out the rough edges of life, particularly if we don't overindulge. Okay? Consuming alcohol can change our personality in the moment, giving us the confidence to approach the girl, to have a difficult conversation, or to do something that we've been putting off. In a way, there is some truth to the liquid courage idea. And in an age of chronic anxiety and stress, alcohol has an incredible, immediate ability to selectively turn down the volume on that monkey mind of overthinking. It's one of the reasons why we like it. And anyone who says that alcohol cannot make for a good time either hasn't done it, or they haven't done it right, or they are lying to you. Okay? Of course, alcohol can be a very, very good time. That's why it is so popular. Okay? And as I've mentioned, as long as I've been alive, at least as long as I can remember, this idea that a small amount of alcohol, right? Maybe 1 to 2 glasses of wine per day is actually good for you. Okay, that it might actually be health promoting. I will say that there is a sea change, that many people are quitting or reducing. Many people like me who never, quote, had a problem, weren't alcoholics, right? No sign of fatty liver, no cancer, etc. But they're dropping alcohol. And the obvious question, in light of all the benefits of alcohol that I just discussed, is why? Okay, so first, as is the case with so many subjects on this podcast, this is not a moral issue. Okay, we're talking about low to moderate levels of alcohol consumption in the range of what many of us have been told our whole lives is actually good for us, okay? Now, I acknowledge that there are some religions that would disagree with me on this. Islam, the Church of Latter-day Saints, to name a few, okay, what many people refer to as Mormons, LDS. But assuming that you're not religiously opposed to alcohol, which I think it's fair to say is the majority of Americans, to me, there is no moral connotation here. I am operating in, and my comments are squarely in the realm of effective versus not effective. Okay, does this support your goals and objectives for your life over long term or not? Drinking doesn't make you a bad person. Not drinking doesn't make you a good person. Okay, you can still be an asshole while drinking soda water. Plenty of people have done it. And this is incredibly important to say. The very, very last thing that we want to do is take what I believe to be a very positive change and start wrapping blame and shame and judgment all into the same thing. We just don't want that. Okay. This is the same conversation around obesity. It's the same conversation around habit formation. I cannot think of a situation in which additional shame and judgment made a non-moral situation better. Okay. Something that had nothing to do with morality. You're not a good person if you're thin. You're not a bad person if you're obese, and vice versa. Okay. Just has nothing to do with it. Same thing with low to moderate levels of consumption of alcohol here. Okay. In my view, there's just no moral connotation, and any additional shame and judgment, it's just counterproductive. Okay. It's squarely in the not effective camp, in my opinion. Just my 2 cents. I always want to throw that caveat out there because I know that there can be a lot of shame and blame and judgment and moralizing around subjects that I just think it's just not helpful. Okay. So let's keep going. Why did I quit drinking when I didn't have a problem? And the short answer is a guy by the name of Dr. Andrew Huberman. Now, you're probably familiar with the work of Dr. Andrew Huberman. If you're not, Dr. Andrew Huberman has an incredibly popular podcast called Huberman Lab Podcast. And I had heard about this episode that he did, I should say. And he is I think, neurologist and ophthalmologist at Stanford. And he just is an incredible wealth of information. He's done a lot of incredibly powerful episodes on dopamine, on the reward centers of the brain, on tools and protocols that you can use to improve, I guess I should say, science-based tools and protocols that you can use to improve your health and your life. Just has done an incredible service on many subjects, and his incredibly lengthy, thorough, and in-depth episode on alcohol being one of them. I had heard about this podcast for a while. I had actually had a couple of friends who had either cut alcohol for a period of time or had been considering it. And so I'd sort of known about this podcast. Honestly, I don't even know who the first person was who told me about it. But I've got a very good friend, and I respect his opinion a lot. And at one point in time, he told me, yeah, I've cut out alcohol for a period of time. And I was, like me, squarely in the camp of low to moderate, doesn't have a problem. And we had enjoyed drinking together at times in the past. So I was a little surprised to hear him say that. And when I asked him why, he pointed to this Andrew Huberman podcast. So anyways, this podcast is sort of floating around. It's in the back of my mind. I'm the kind of person who likes to challenge my own thinking and seek out people that disagree with me. I don't always do this. I'm not perfect on it. But when it comes to diet, when I was plant-based and almost exclusively plant-based, I would seek out people like Dr. Paul Saladino to challenge my thinking on, was this correct? And sometimes my thinking evolves and sometimes it doesn't. But I never want to be the kind of person who's just in an echo chamber. And I never want to be the kind of person who is sitting there with something that's obvious and isn't seeking out, isn't challenging, that sort of thinking. So I've heard about this Huberman podcast. It's on my list of podcasts to listen to at some nebulous point in the future. And for some reason, a couple weeks before my 40th birthday, I decided it's time to give it a rip. I'd known about it and I decided to listen to it. And if you haven't listened to this podcast, I would highly recommend it. Okay. It's about 2.5 hours. I think it was actually published in August of 2022. And I believe by 2023, it was the #1 downloaded podcast, I believe, on Apple Podcasts. Okay, this thing was a complete tour de force, 2.5 hours of science, of just, I don't know, like in a very methodical and crushing way, just sort of goes line by line, blow by blow, and just devastates the argument that low to moderate levels of alcohol consumption are good for you. I think by now this thing has something like 7.5 million views on YouTube. Many people that I've spoken with in my personal lives have seen the episode or have listened to the episode on, say, Apple Podcasts or Spotify. So really, really, really has changed many, many, many lives. And I'm very, very grateful to Andrew Huberman for pulling this together, because it's just a monumental amount of work and he's changed the lives of many, many people. But at the time, I wasn't super happy about it. I'll tell you that much. But I really didn't have any argument to the facts and evidence that he pointed out. And I knew when I listened to it that my mind was open and that I was going to have to give it a shot. And that there were a few things, and I'll go through some of the specific points. He talks about cancer. He talks about the obvious things like fatty liver and diabetes and disruptions of sleep, etc. But there were a couple of very unexpected things, 2 of them specifically, and we'll discuss what those are, that really just hit me like a ton of bricks, right? That really just pointed to me and said, you got to give this a shot, because in your case, these things are at play here. And they're likely the kinds of things that nobody would have known about. Okay, that's what's so funny. When I talk to people and I say, hey, this is the reason why, a lot of times people are very surprised, because these are things that I knew about myself that many people didn't know about me or didn't associate with me. So we'll talk specifically about what those 2 items are. But for now, I'll just say that this episode was incredibly powerful. It opened my eyes and it convinced me that cutting alcohol was worth a shot. Now, I do want to pause here because I'm a fan of rhetoric. I studied rhetoric in college. I'm a big fan of argumentation and debate. And I want to just take a moment to reflect on this episode. Okay, why was this episode so powerful? And why did Dr. Andrew Huberman break through with so many people on something that many people had been saying for a long time? Yeah, I know that, in school we learned 1 to 2 glasses of wine is probably a good thing. But there were many people who had attempted to make the point that this was incredibly wrong. And it's also important to note that although Dr. Andrew Huberman is a scientist, is a PhD, he's a professor, he's a doctor, it's also important to point out that this isn't like original work to Dr. Huberman. Okay, mostly what he's doing here is he is synthesizing the work of other scientists, other people who have done the research, the basic research on the subject of alcohol. So that's incredibly important here, because what Huberman does, and I believe so effectively, is he just makes the case very persuasively. Okay, so it's ultimately not about science in this case. It's about persuasion. Now, in my own view is that in many ways, Huberman is a very unlikely person to break through on this subject, right? If you think about it, I mean, He's not like an alcohol researcher. He's not a person who is some scientific authority, right? Like the leading alcohol researcher of his day. He doesn't work for some government authority. He's not even really a health influencer in a way. Like he's a very fit guy. He looks to be in good shape and looks to be healthy. But it's not like he has some significant health authority. And this isn't his field of study. But somehow Huberman, a very unlikely character on this in my view, manages to break through for so many people, including myself. How? Invoking his superior knowledge of science, his superior moral authority, his own personal health transformation? None of that. Now, isn't that interesting? Of course, there is some science in the episode, but what I'd suggest is that what's not at play here is significant. Okay, we've had finger-wagging moralizers. We've had doctors warning against the dangers of excess alcohol for a long time. But I think there are really three things, at least as far as I can tell, that make Huberman's episode incredibly powerful. The first is that he takes aim at the right target. Okay, it's very easy to write off alcoholics, and it's very easy for people that are in the low to moderate category to heed the advice of don't drink to excess. It's nebulous. What is excess? Again, we all know that we're not that guy who's drinking under the bridge with the brown paper bag. Okay, we're not that. We're holding down the job. We've got a family. We go to the gym. We work out. We're, quote, healthy. Okay. So that's the first thing. And Huberman doesn't go for that, right? He picks a fight with you, with me. Okay. He says, no, I'm talking about you. I'm not talking about the guy down by the bridge. Okay. So that's the first thing, is that he sets his sights correctly. The second thing, and he defines his terms very specifically. Okay. And I believe the categories are something like low is something like 1 to 7 servings of alcohol per week. And we can talk servings, we can talk drinks, but for now, about 1 drink to 7 drinks per week. And moderate, I believe, is in the 7 to 14 per week. So that's in moderate, that's maybe quite a bit, depending on who you are. But low, that's quite a few people. Okay. A lot of people fall into that low category. And Huberman is talking about you. Okay. He's talking about me too. Second, although there is science in the episode, he uses very simple and very powerful language. Alcohol is a poison, and it serves no biological function. Now, again, this is very different than the language that we've understood around alcohol. In moderation, it's not so bad for you. In moderation, it might be healthy for you. This is a very, very different message. And he specifically goes after this idea of the hormetic effect. This thing that was my understanding about alcohol. Part of the benefit comes from, a little bit of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? The hormetic effect. It's why working out works. It's why breaking down the muscle in order for it to grow matters. Huberman here echoes the likes of people like Chris Williamson on the Modern Wisdom podcast, where he says that there's something incredibly odd about alcohol, and that alcohol is the only drug in which people assume that you have a problem if you don't consume it. Again, it just makes you think. Okay, all these things tee up the idea that, have I been wrong? Have I been fundamentally wrong about alcohol? But third, and again, I think this is just so important, he's not judgmental. He doesn't talk down to the listener as a member of the intelligentsia or of the religious elite or as a, quote, scientist. And this is very, very effective. Okay, and again, compare this to much of the language that we hear from academics, from scientists around subjects like obesity, right? Where there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of judgment, there's a lot of, well, if you could just exercise a little bit more willpower, a little bit more self-control. The problem is your problem. Like, you're the issue. To me, that's just not effective. And I think it's worth reflecting. If you have an opportunity to listen to the Huberman podcast, I don't know, let me know. But that's my view on it. I think those are three things that, at least for me, stand out as the reason why this Huberman podcast broke through on a subject that many people just have a knee-jerk reaction to, right? Something that people like. It's not really creating obvious problems in their lives, but it opened their minds to it. So I think it's worth pausing, reflecting, and tipping our hat to Andrew Huberman. Okay, now we've touched on this a little bit just as we talk about the why this episode was so effective, but let's drill into Huberman's main point. Okay, what is Huberman's thesis on alcohol? And again, I'd highly encourage you to listen to the full episode if you have the opportunity to do so, but I'll give you the Cliff Notes version here. Okay, first, alcohol is a poison that serves no biological function. Okay, there is no biological function in your body or anybody that gets better with alcohol. Full stop. As an almost 42-year-old man living in the United States of America in 2026, that's unbelievable to me. Okay, in light of what we were told growing up, that a little bit's good for you. To that point, no amount of alcohol is beneficial. And that the benefits from, say, the hormetic effect, this idea that a little bit of a stress to the system might be better for you than none at all. Right? We're sort of trending in the anti-fragility realm here. That's non-existent. No evidence for that. Okay, very interesting. Very different than what we've heard. And that you significantly increase your risk of many diseases and health issues, from heart attacks to disturbed sleep to cancer, by drinking. And again, low to moderate amounts of alcohol significantly increases a large number of health issues. Now, my hunch is that I'm probably like many people who heard one or two nuggets from this podcast, because there are many, and thought, if I'm being honest, I wonder if that's me. I do get up at nighttime more than I'd like to, and I don't seem to sleep as well as I used to, or maybe I'm dealing with weight gain or fertility issues, or my mom died of cancer, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe it's time to think that I should give this sobriety thing a chance. Just for a bit, see if my sleep improves, see if my weight improves, maybe my skin improves. And I know that this probably sounds odd, but for me personally, it wasn't the direct health impacts that really stood out to me. I've said this before, but there were two things, and we're going to talk about them in a second. There were two things that really just slapped me in the face, right? That just woke me up, that just said, hey, you're missing something here, and you got to pay attention. And these two things, I think it's fair to say, ended a 20-year-long relationship that I had with alcohol, or at least significantly redefined it. Okay, so probably makes sense to give you some context. What was my relationship with alcohol? I had said that I was squarely in the low to moderate category. How did I start drinking? What types of alcohol did I consume? How did I get to it? And I think it's probably safe to say that I came to drinking the way many Americans have come to drinking, in college. Growing up, my parents actually didn't drink. I didn't drink at all. I don't know that I've ever seen my mom consume alcohol, and maybe I've seen my dad consume alcohol once or twice growing up. Maybe like a beer with one of his brothers or something, in very, very rare occasions. And there was no alcohol in our house. It just wasn't a thing. But when I went to college, just in an attempt to be social and to have fun, I started drinking. And again, I didn't drink a ton. I wasn't part of a fraternity. I drank maybe on the weekends. I still had good grades. I was still in shape. I was still athletic. It was the sort of thing that was just part of the social fabric, you could say, at the time, and probably is still part of the social fabric at the time. Does that mean it's good? No, but it's a what water sort of a situation, right? The fish that's in the water doesn't realize that it's in water. And while I knew that alcohol in excessive amounts wasn't good for me, again, squarely in the low to moderate, I'm under the impression that I'm operating within the range of what would be considered healthy. Fast forward a few years, I graduate from college, I'm working in the corporate world, And drinking, at least for the corporate job that I had, was not necessarily an expectation. But there are many firms where that is just networking, right? That's just how you network. That's how you get your next role. That's how you find your next mentor. It's not in the halls, in the office. It's after work, at the bar, or at happy hour, or at the cigar lounge, or at the airport lounge. That was the nature of my existence, and it was something that I enjoyed. And with a little bit of additional money and a little bit of additional incentive, you get to drink better booze. And when you're drinking better booze and the quality is there, it can be a very, very enjoyable experience. I liked the feeling. I didn't have a problem. I was good at my job, had good physical appearance. And when I occasionally did get my blood work done, no red flags. Okay. In general, I am a motivated person. And one thing that was incredibly nice about alcohol is that it helped me relax a bit. Just loosen up a little bit, enjoy a little bit more, and to quiet the monkey mind. All the good things, all the reasons that we enjoy drinking, especially if not done to excess. But, if I were to classify my drinking, I'd say, probably 2 to 3 drinks over the weekend, maybe with the occasional cocktail during the week, if, say, we went out to dinner. Certainly not a nightly habit. I didn't believe that it interfered with my ability to get up or to, say, go to the gym or work out. And just honestly, almost never hungover, unless it was something like New Year's Eve, some big celebration or something like that. But these two things, when I heard them, they really stuck with me, and I just couldn't shake them. And I knew that I had to try it. So here are the 2 things that really convinced me to try cutting out alcohol. And the first is the role that alcohol plays in chronic stress tolerance. And second is the role that alcohol plays in new habit formation. Okay, and these were 2 very unexpected topics that popped up in the Huberman podcast. And again, when they hit me, I knew it was me. I knew it was me. Even if nobody else saw it, I knew that I saw them in myself. And we're going to talk about each one of them. Okay, so first let's talk alcohol and chronic. And the answer here is a little unexpected. In the short run, alcohol will alleviate stress and anxiety in the moment. Okay, it's one of the reasons why we like alcohol. It's probably the reason why I liked alcohol, is because it just had that ability of calming me down, of just shutting down the monkey mind. Okay, it's one of the well-known benefits of alcohol. But here's the kicker. Over the long run, when we're not drinking, habitual use of alcohol lowers our baseline ability to deal with stress and anxiety, causing, in essence, a feedback loop in which we subtly, or not so subtly depending on the scale, turn to alcohol to alleviate stress in the moment, but are ultimately less able to deal with that same level of stress or a similar level of stress in the future. Okay, so said succinctly, there is a ratcheting down effect of our ability to deal with stress in the absence of alcohol with chronic alcohol use. And that was something that when I heard it and I audited my own head, my actions, my results, my life over the past few years with alcohol, I realized was at play in my life. And whether anybody else saw it or not, I knew that that was true. And when I heard that, it was like a lock tumbler just going clunk, just sliding into place. Because I knew that I had experienced that personally. And I also really, really had seen it with some people who were very close to me. People who had no reason to be stressed, literally nothing to worry about, but the most normal, the most mundane, just mild everyday situations, just regularly hitting 11. Unless they had a drink in their hand. People who, like me, were squarely in the low to moderate category. But they had been doing it longer. Okay? They'd been drinking for decades. And I could see it with myself. Things that I'd never really given much thought to. Just not really an issue for me. No apprehension, no worries. But I started to find myself slowly second guessing myself a bit, being a little bit less aggressive, a little bit less assertive, a bit less go for it, a bit more on my own head, unless I had a drink. And that to me was very, very significant. Second, and related to the first point, is around new habit formation. Huberman makes the very convincing case that alcohol has the effect of solidifying existing habits, but making new habit formation more difficult. And again, this one really, really hit home for me. Again, it's just funny because for many people, it's about weight loss, it's about skin, it's about hormones, it's about cancer, it's about heart attacks. But for me, it wasn't. It was these two things. It was chronic stress, and it was about new habit formation. Because I could see that mirror, and when I looked at that mirror, I knew it was true about me. I just knew. I am a father. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm someone who's interested in a lot of things. Podcaster, horses, baby shepherd, not like a shepherd of little children, but, I've got like a small flock of sheep. So I'd call myself a baby shepherd. Not commercial, just sheep running around doing what sheep do. But you get it, okay? I'm interested in a lot of things. But again, I found a bit of a lag between knowing what to do and taking action on doing it. And when I looked at it in the mirror, I didn't like it. I'm sure we have our own individual baseline of what's normal for us. And I think if a lot of people looked at my life, they'd say, what are you talking about? You do plenty of things. But I just knew it was suboptimal. I knew it was suboptimal for me. And I wanted to see what would happen if I cut out alcohol and to see if it moved the needle. And spoiler, it did. Okay, we'll talk about some of the results here, but I'll just tell you very, very succinctly, my instincts were right on this. Now, I don't know if this is actually true, but it's a good story either way. And I've heard that when they're training elephants, when the elephant is really young, they bury this massive metal stake in the ground and attach it to the leg of the elephant using what would be then a very heavy chain. Well, when the elephant's young and it tries to break free, the chain and the stake, they're just way, way too strong. And eventually the elephant learns that the chain and the stake are just too much to overcome. And so it stops trying. Now, this belief persists as the elephant continues to grow. So as the elephant's getting bigger and bigger and stronger, that chain, that stake, it's the same size. And eventually, compared to that full-grown elephant, the chain and the stake are tiny. Right? One step in the right direction and the elephant is free. But the elephant knows that it can't possibly break this massive chain. So it doesn't even bother trying, right? And this chain, in essence, becomes this invisible barrier that anybody else can look at and say, why don't you just take one step in the right direction and snap, you'll be free. But the elephant knows it can't do it. And in many ways, I felt like I could see this in other people and I could see it in myself. What was the thing that was stopping me from taking action on the thing that I wanted, my ultimate desire? Some invisible chain. Was it alcohol? It's probably an oversimplification. Did it play a role? I think it did. Actually, I know it did. Okay, so we've talked about what convinced me, the why, if you will, but I imagine for many people, the how may be the sticking point. So I want to share what I did. Okay, the approach that I followed to end a 20-year habit, one and done, shut down, cold. This is an approach that I've used many times to cut out habits that I'd like to rid from my life. I found it very useful, very effective, so I'd like to share. And I'm sure someone else has thought of this. I didn't learn it from anyone, so I don't know what to call it. I just sort of stumbled onto it. So for now, I don't know, it's like strategic substitution. Okay, we've all heard about substitution. This is different. Okay, it's different than the typical substitution that you've probably heard of. And at some point in time, somebody will tell me what it's actually called, or maybe we'll come up with a better way to discuss it or describe it. But for now, let's get into it. Let's talk about a couple of important aspects of the how to stop drinking, or at least what worked for me. Okay, so first we're going to talk about mental priming. Okay, mindset is obviously a big focus for this channel. It's a big focus and priority of mine personally. I'm a huge believer in mindset. And I've said before that I believe that mindset is the highest ROI investment that you can make from a personal development standpoint. I believe that 100%. Not a guru here, but I will preach. I will. Even as I continue to build my own mindset muscle. I've done at least 1 or 2 episodes on mindset at this point in time. So if you're interested in those, on building that mindset muscle, definitely go check those out. But for here, we're just going to talk about priming very briefly, about mental priming. One very powerful mindset practice, which has been well established in the scientific literature, from what I understand, particularly in sports psychology, that has long been observed to have a very, very powerful effect on goal attainment, goal achievement, right? New habit formation as well. And at the core of this is the idea that, well, what the mind believes, the body oftentimes can achieve. And one way to shape belief, to shape what is possible in our own minds, is by priming, by looking at the results of what people like you have done and recognizing that, hey, if it's possible that they can do it, it's possible that I can do it. And this is something that I like to do anytime I embark on a new habit. Now, one of the most famous examples of this is Roger Bannister and his breaking of the 4-minute mile. Many of you are probably familiar with the story of Roger Bannister, but for those unfamiliar, for as long as recorded history, no human had ever run a mile in less than 4 minutes. Many people theorized that it might be physiologically impossible. That is, until May 1954, when a guy by the name of Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile, shattering what appeared to be a hard limitation on human physical potential, a barrier which had managed to defy the world's greatest athletes for decades, until it didn't. And Bannister at the time has said that he used mental priming, visualization, to help him break through this barrier, to view in his own mind that it was possible. But what's also incredible about this story is what happened next. I've said before that this barrier stood for decades, as long as recorded history. But 1 month after Bannister breaks the 4-minute mile, another runner, a guy by the name of John Landy, also went on to break the 4-minute mile in June of that very same year. Interesting. In 1955, 3 athletes went on to break the 4-minute barrier, and 5 did it again in 1956. By 2001, a high school student, a guy by the name of Alan Webb, broke the once impossible barrier, with today over 2,000 athletes having gone sub 4 minutes since the time of Roger Bannister. Once Bannister showed that it was possible, other people could see that it was, and they could do it. And that is the power of priming. So one very, very important step that I take when I embark or attempt to embark on a new habit or attempt to transform myself in some meaningful way is I try to look for examples of people that I can use for mental priming, people who have done it before, people who have achieved the kinds of results that I would like to achieve. So when it came to cutting alcohol, I looked at before and after sober pictures. I watched short clips from normal people who'd quit drinking and heard about their stories. What was difficult? What benefits did they receive? Did they regret their decision? Did they go back to drinking? I consumed other content from people like Chris Williamson of the Modern Wisdom podcast, Jordan Peterson, a guy by the name of Sober Leon on YouTube. Not all of their stories were exactly similar to mine, but I found bits of wisdom, inspiration, and mental priming. Second, possibly the most important thing that I did, which stacked the odds in my favor, was that I got my wife on board. Now, I am incredibly fortunate that I am married to an exceptional woman, okay, true life partner, supporter, and friend. But I wasn't 100% sure of how she was going to respond. We'd had some good times with alcohol. Again, both of us squarely in the low to moderate. No problem. Not an issue for us. And while neither of us felt that we, quote, needed alcohol, she'd actually cut it out before when she'd been pregnant with our kids. So I knew that she could do it, but I wasn't sure that this is something that she would want to do. Of course, we'd have found a way to make it work, but it might be difficult if she wanted to continue to drink and I didn't. It's not as much fun to drink alone, okay? Would she feel judged? I don't know. I wasn't sure. But when I came to her and told her that I'd listened to this Huberman podcast, I'd been giving it some thought for a bit, and that I was at the point that I was looking to try cutting alcohol for a bit, seeing if I liked things better without it. To my surprise, apparently, she had been considering the same, okay, coming at it from a different approach, coming at it from different sources, but she had apparently been thinking about doing the same. So it was simple. We quit. Like I said, the timing was absolutely terrible. It was about 2 weeks before my 40th birthday. And that also brings me to another interesting point about alcohol. Since going on this journey and since cutting it out and opening up to people and explaining what I've been doing and why I've been doing it, one thing that I've been very, very interested to learn is that the number of people who either don't drink or would actually prefer to drink less is way more than I thought. Okay, it's way more. It might be the majority of people that I talk to. Now, this could probably be a reflection of where I'm at in my life. I'm not in my 20s. I'm not in college. I've got young children. I've got a career. I've got a company to run. I've got many, many things other than socializing with, say, friends that are high up on my priority list. And many of my peers are the same. But one thing that I've been very, very surprised by is that when I started opening up and having these conversations with people, I just found way more people than I ever expected really don't drink or really don't drink a whole bunch. And that was a point that Huberman made in his podcast. And I was very, very surprised to see it come true in my own lived experience. That something like, I'm going to totally butcher the stats here, but something like 80% of people have felt pressured to drink when they didn't want to drink in the last year. And that's just a huge number that really would have preferred not to drink, but they did it out of social pressure. That's most of us. And that means that it's likely that many of us are pressuring people to drink when we ourselves don't necessarily want to drink. Again, because a lot of our rituals are tied up in this. Okay, now I've teased this point a whole bunch. Let's get into this idea of what I probably want to refer to as strategic substitution. Okay, it's a different type of substitution that I found very effective. I used with alcohol, and it's different than the kinds of substitution that you've probably heard of. Now, when most people hear substitution on the subject of alcohol, they're probably thinking, hey, I like drinking beer, so instead of drinking alcoholic beer, why don't I drink non-alcoholic beer? Okay, or I like drinking cocktails, so instead of drinking a cocktail with alcohol, I'll drink a cocktail without the alcohol. There's a certain logic to it. If it works for you, amazing. I don't think this works for a lot of people. Now, why is that? Well, because it's a bad trade, right? You're attempting to trade something that you really like for something that you really don't. It's not really a fair trade if we're being honest. And what we're hoping makes up the difference is willpower. Okay, we're hoping that we can just sort of muscle through it, that we can just sort of use mental willpower to say, you know, this non-alcoholic beer, it's just as good. And we know that it isn't. What we're hoping is that what bridges the gap is willpower. And as you probably already know, willpower is a finite resource and it tends to buckle under stress. So in my view, I get the logic of the strategy, but it's certainly not ideal. What I try to do instead is I trade something that I find very desirable, something that I like a whole lot, for something else that I like a whole lot. But there's an important caveat, okay? The most important caveat, the thing that makes this work, is it is something that I find personally less addictive. Something that is as desirable, maybe even more desirable, but is less addictive. Okay, that's the powerful 1-2 punch of this approach. And there's only one reason to break the habit. That's all. Okay, this is something that might actually be worse for you. It might come with other costs, both monetary costs, time costs, and some of them do. But the important, powerful point is that it is as desirable or more desirable, and it is less addictive. Now, this takes some honesty to be able to define what this is, right? So if you're saying, hey, I'm going to stop drinking alcohol, and instead I'm going to start using highly addictive painkillers, not a good strategy, right? For obvious reasons. You're trading something that's less addictive, likely, for something that's more addictive, so it doesn't work. I use this very, very effectively with sugar. Okay, a few years ago, I started to recognize that I had a real issue with sugar. Okay, candies, chocolates, that sort of thing. Definitely a topic for a future episode, but even though sugar was probably not affecting me in an outwardly visible way, I wasn't overweight, it wasn't affecting numbers on the scale, I was still lean, I was still ripped. Sugar was really affecting me mentally. Okay, it had its claws sunk deep. Okay, and I'll just tell you that if I opened up a bag of candy, almost no matter what size, I was going to eat it, like all of it. Okay, just real problem. And I had to stop. It was affecting my mood. We're going to go into this whole idea of metabolic psychiatry. But I've come to find that I'm very, very affected mentally by sugar. So it was very important for me to come to terms with this. One, to be open and honest and acknowledge it, and then take serious steps to remedy that, both for my own sanity and also the sanity of people around me. But obviously, this was difficult. I very, very much enjoyed candy. And again, like alcohol, I didn't have a quote problem. Candy and chocolates have another added benefit of being cheap and very convenient to acquire. And there's almost no social stigma associated with consuming candy. But if I'm being honest, and this is at the core of the insight here, it wasn't my absolute favorite thing to eat in the world. All else being equal in terms of price, convenience, etc., I probably would have preferred sitting down to a meal at, say, one of my favorite restaurants, a place like South of Nick's in San Clemente, where I lived, or getting sushi from one of my favorite restaurants in the area. Okay, so this is at the core of the insight, that I could trade something like candy, something like chocolate, for going out to eat at a restaurant and my favorite place. I substituted sugar, candies, chocolate for foods that I actually liked a whole lot more, but obviously they're less convenient and they're way more expensive. But in order to break this habit, I gave myself permission to spend the additional time and money in the short term to break the habit, to break this pattern. Maybe even, you could say, an addiction that I had to sugar. And I think for some people, it is approaching an addiction. Importantly, I didn't attempt to trade sugar for a, quote, healthier option, right? Try to find some sugar-free candy to see if that worked. I didn't say, well, instead of eating sugar, I'm going to eat an orange, right? That wouldn't have worked. Again, I would have been relying on willpower. But I took something that was legitimately as good or better, something like going to my favorite restaurant, something like, buying a particular food item that I really, really enjoyed, and I made that trade. And in the short run, it was more expensive. It was less convenient, but it did allow me to break the habit. I think it's very, very debatable as to whether, say, tortilla chips fried in seed oils are healthier for you than sugar. I don't know about that. But I was willing to make that trade in the short run because I've personally found tortilla chips fried in seed oils to be much less addictive than sugar. Far easier for me to eat some and then stop. And after a period of time of not eating candy, not eating sugars, allowing my microbiome to reset, which is what I believe is the mechanism, and my taste buds to reset, I eventually was able to break myself from this pattern of addiction to the point where now I can eat a single piece of candy and be done. So to me, that is the goal here. That's the mechanism. That's why it works. Because we take something that we really, really like, and instead of trying to find a healthier option or a an option that we realistically we don't like as much. We find something that we like as much or more, but we understand that there are trade-offs in terms of cost and in terms of time. Okay, so hopefully you get the idea here, right? And then slowly over time, thinking wisely, strategically, slowly work with the variables of convenience and cost to settle down to a pattern that is sustainable and comfortable, right? Maybe you can't go out to eat every single night of the week for forever and ever. Amen. That might not be realistic for you, but maybe there's a way after a period of time that you can slowly start to work in, play with some of these other variables, whether it's cost, whether it's time, etc. Okay, so how might this work with alcohol? Maybe instead of staying up late to drink, you trade that for getting up early on the weekends and going to your favorite lunch spot. Okay, especially with the person that you love. That's also a very, very good time. Maybe it's going to watch a live performance of a favorite show, something like Cirque du Soleil or a concert. Maybe it's giving yourself permission to drive an hour and a half to go get Ethiopian food, something that me and my family did yesterday. Maybe it's going to watch a UFC fight or a dog show or traveling to see a friend. Maybe it's permission to go watch a movie or to just sit up and read a book, something that my wife and I had found that we had gotten out of the habit of doing. But when we cut out alcohol, we found ourselves doing more and more. Or the obvious, do what married people do at night. Okay, just saying. Many, many options here. Find something that you enjoy doing, and I guarantee you that they're out there, as much or more than alcohol, and give yourself permission to do it. Okay, that would be my strong little bit of advice, little insight that really, really worked for me, and I believe it will work for you too. Okay, I've got one more final little bit of advice on the how. Okay, how to make this work. And that is to treat this as an experiment and not as a religion. Okay, very, very important. Going a few weeks without booze for a dry January is a great thing. Okay, it's a great thing, regardless of what happens next. Having a reset in which your body detoxes a bit, your tolerance resets a bit, you discover the fun and interest in doing other things other than drinking. Okay, nothing but good in my book. Okay, even if you do decide to go back to drinking in February, okay, still very, very good. But there will likely be this temptation from you or from people around you to want to dive into the big question right away. So what does this mean? Are you like, never gonna drink again? Like ever? And in my humble opinion here, I would just avoid that thinking. Okay, if people ask, my own 2 cents would be just tell them the truth. I'm testing it out for dry January. I'm going to see how it feels. I haven't made any decisions beyond that. Okay, maybe you have, but my view is give it a shot, treat it like an experiment and not a religion. No purity tests here. If you have one drink during dry January, you're not a bad person. You didn't completely mess up. I don't think it's personally a big deal. Okay, I just don't. Again, I have this squarely in the effective versus not effective camp. Can you stop drinking for the entire month of January if you're in the low to moderate category? Of course, right? Obviously. But does it make you a bad person, or did all of your results come undone because you had a drink at some point? No. If at some point in time in the future, if it serves you, if you're in a setting where it's appropriate and you want to have a drink, does it change your status as, quote, sober? No, I don't think so. I don't think at all. And my view is that this is a trap. And sometimes it's a trap that we place ourselves into. Sometimes it's a trap that other people unwittingly or wittingly place us into. My humble bit of advice would be just avoid that thinking altogether. You can see the trap. You know it's a trap. Just walk around the trap. Okay? That's my 2 cents. Okay, so we've talked about the why. We've talked about the how. Now let's talk about results. Okay? What's been good? What's been not so good? And what's been more of a mixed blessing? As I've mentioned, I'm 2 years in at this point. So the benefits, my perspective has changed. It will change. I may even do this once a year, depending on where I'm at. I may circle up next year and just give you the update on where I'm at with my journey with alcohol. But let's go ahead and start with the not so good, okay? The most obvious one, the social impact. the social impact for me at this moment is real, but I will say it has gotten better. And it's gotten better, I think, for two reasons. As I've mentioned, it turns out that many of my friends either didn't drink that much to begin with or have been cutting booze over time. And secondly, that I've built more routine with the people that I care about, the people that I love spending time with, that is not centered around alcohol. Okay, I've mentioned many of these things already, but choosing more adventure over alcohol. I just think that as I started giving my permission to experience other things in life, I started to realize how much of the de facto choice is to sit around drinking as opposed to engaging in other things that I find to be as enjoyable or more enjoyable. So to me, I think that's the number one, not so great, okay, that it is the social impact. Now, obviously, depending on how much you're drinking and with whom you're drinking, the social impact, it might just be all good. Right? There's probably some people that you don't want to be drinking with to begin with. Let's talk about things that have been a bit mixed, right? The in-betweens, and then we'll get into the things that I view as the benefits. Alcohol has an incredible ability to numb, right? To numb strong feelings. And for me, this has been a very mixed blessing. There have definitely been some moments in my life where I relied on alcohol to numb some very painful feelings. Okay. A couple years ago, I lost two of my dogs. They both died naturally. They were older mastiffs, but that was an incredibly difficult time for me. These dogs meant the world to me. And it was very hard, and they got sick. And as they got older, there were times where it was very, very rough. And, your mind can go to a very, very dark place. And if I'm being honest and looking back and auditing where I was at that point in my life, I did use alcohol to numb some of those strong feelings. And since cutting out alcohol, I've also had very strong feelings. And I still do have very strong feelings at times. Not having that tool, and again, it's there, it's not a religion, I can use it if I want it, but I am committed not to using it. Because again, I do believe that it has this ratcheting down effect. And the way that I think about anxiety is the way that I think about these strong feelings now, where I say, I'd like to ideally be in a place where I can deal with the rough edges of life without relying on alcohol if I can help it. So in those difficult moments, it is a mixed blessing. If I look back in those moments, say around the time my dog's passed or around the time I've had other challenges in my life, am I somewhat grateful to alcohol? I am. Yeah, I would say so. One of the things that I've seen a lot when people cut out alcohol is that they can at times see these very dramatic weight loss and overall health transformations. In my case, I don't know that I've seen anything like that. Now, to be fair, I wasn't obese before, I was in shape. But when it comes to athletic performance narrowly, I don't know that I've seen a huge difference. I'm just being honest. Maybe I wasn't drinking a ton before, and that's probably part of it. But I don't know that I've seen a massive difference when it comes to athletic performance or performance in the gym. Okay, so now let's talk about what's been good. What are the benefits that I've experienced since cutting out alcohol? First and foremost, the other aspects of my life have become much, much more interesting. Okay, the way I would describe it is like alcohol is cheap thrills. It's always there. It's always available. You can get it anywhere. Again, for me, it's kind of like candy, right? It's cheap, convenient. It's always there. If you're drinking moderately, not really a stigma associated with it, you can just make a good time a bit better. But in my case, I started to recognize that it was becoming the de facto form of entertainment in my life. And as I started looking at these other areas of entertainment and of adventure, whether it's travel or, again, experiencing live things, horses, any of these other things, I started to really enjoy the other aspects of my life more. I gave myself permission to enjoy other aspects of my life more. Getting more into the health space, my sleep definitely improved. Definitely improved. I will say when I combined cutting alcohol with cutting out regular drip coffee and moving to espressos, my sleep improved even more. Okay, so I would say over the last 10 years, I have prioritized getting things done over sleep. Okay, like many sort of hard-charging adults that want it all. You sleep when you're dead kind of thing. That's been my attitude. But I've started to recognize that I've got to make a change, and cutting out alcohol and now cutting out drip coffee and moving to espresso has really, really helped. Improved testosterone, okay, by a lot. At the time of this recording, I am almost 42 years old. I just had my blood work done with Function Health. We'll do an entire episode on my experience with Function Health in a few weeks, and we will discuss my results overall. Okay, I'm going to borrow from people that I admire, like Dr. Paul Saladino, who have been forthcoming about their blood work, and they've shared, they've discussed. I'm going to do the same. I think that's just a really, really good practice for anybody who is in the health and wellness space, to be transparent, what's going well, what isn't, talk about it, to learn. I aim to do the same. But one thing I was very surprised to see was that my testosterone was recorded at the highest that it's ever been. I unfortunately didn't get my testosterone tested when I was like early in my 20s. It just wasn't a big thing. I can remember actually going in, I think I was maybe 29 or 30 at the time. And I asked the PA that I was seeing with One Medical, I said, hey, I want to also get my testosterone checked. And the guy looks at me and he's just like, what? Why would you ever want it? What are you talking about? You look fine. You got muscle. Why would we need to test your testosterone? And I just said, I want to have a baseline. And this was before people were doing it, I guess. But the guy was just totally baffled. And I'm glad that I did. But at that point in time, I had my testosterone checked and it was fairly high. It was like 730, I think, and for total testosterone. And that put me in the, like, for my age group, like a little bit high, not anything excessive. But now my testosterone tested over 10 years later, and my testosterone is at 950. Okay, so over a 200-point increase as I've gotten older. Okay, and I'm not on any TRT, I'm not on any creatine, I don't take any protein shakes, none of that. Okay, just all natural. So to me, that is very, very significant. And this is, again, with suboptimal sleep. So we'll get into some of my blood work in the future, and we'll talk a little bit about what I'm going to be focused on next. Hint, hint, sleep is a part of it. But to me, this is a very, very welcome change. And let me just go ahead and say this about testosterone right now. Many of us tend to think about testosterone as the hormone responsible for aggression or like muscle development, maybe putting hair on your chest, just like man stuff. Okay. And that is true, that testosterone is important for all of that. But it's much, much more than that. Okay. Again, I like Huberman's description of testosterone here, where he describes testosterone as the hormone that is responsible for making striving feel good. Okay. It is the hormone that makes striving feel good to us. It's highly plugged into the dopamine and reward system of our bodies and of our brains, both for men and women. Okay, this might surprise you. It surprised me. But although women have about 1/10 the testosterone of men on average, they actually have more testosterone than estrogen. Did you know that? I certainly didn't, not until recently. Now, if you're a man and you're feeling flat, or you're not feeling motivated or energetic, you don't have the drive that you think that you should, not just in the bedroom, but in the gym and in life, it could be your testosterone levels. It could be your T levels. Worth getting them checked out? I believe so. Not just for men, but for women also. In my case, how much of the benefits that I've experienced from cutting out alcohol have been delivered through the mechanism of increased and improved testosterone? I don't know, but my hunch is it's at the core of it. And finally, the entire reason that I started this journey in the first place, the impact on anxiety and new habit formation. Significant improvement. Okay, significant improvement in my view. By 6 months without alcohol, I had already noticed a difference. A significant difference on follow through. Okay, I'd had these things that were just sort of hanging over my head. I'll give you one very, very good concrete example. I had a house in California, that had been sitting. I had some things in it. We needed to move it and we needed to rent it. And for whatever reason, there was just like this invisible chain, kind of a mental block, because I knew there was just a lot involved in it, right? Going back, getting the trucks, getting all that stuff figured out. And I had just been putting it off. And when I cut alcohol, by 3 months later, I'd had it all wrapped up. Like this thing that I'd been putting off for years, just wrapped, done, without much fanfare, without much thought. And when I look back, I'm like, what was the difference? I think it really came down to alcohol. And there have been many other things that have been like this as I look back now on 2 years and I look at all the things that I'd been thinking about or I'd been talking about, whether it's, more rapid hiring and firing decisions with Anthem Athletics or frankly, this podcast. I mean, I'd been thinking about doing a podcast for a long, long time. And I'd always been, willing to just sort of put it off. But once I cut out alcohol and I look back on the last 2 years, the number of things, including this podcast, stuff with work, fitness related items, travel, right? All of these things have significantly improved. The follow through has been significantly better after cutting out alcohol. And I do believe that alcohol has been at the core of that. Has it been all sunshine and roses all the time? Of course not. I still live in the real world. I still have struggle. I still have pain. I still have disappointments. I didn't immediately start levitating on a cloud the moment I set the drink down. Okay, nothing like that. And of course, there are trade-offs, as I mentioned. But to me, they have been worth it. Okay, so worth it. If you are considering a dry January, I salute you. My hat's off to you. I wish you well. I think you're going to crush it. I think it's going to be amazing. If you are considering something beyond a dry January, again, same thing. I think if you look back on the before and after picture of your life without alcohol, or at least with a significant reduction in alcohol, assuming that you're in the low to moderate category like me, I'll just say this. I think you will be very, very pleased with the results. Okay, now we're going to wrap this episode up very shortly, but I want to leave you with 2 final questions. 2 of the most common questions that I get on the subject of drinking, and they are, first, will I ever drink again? And second, if I had to do it all over again, would I drink when I did? Will I ever drink again? It's very likely. Will I ever make it a habit again? No, I don't think so. And again, this isn't about it being a religion. I didn't have a, quote, problem with alcohol. I'm not an alcoholic. Squarely in the low to moderate category. And I'm assuming that if you are listening to this and getting value from this episode, that you are too. But would I have a drink if I go on a vacation, a wedding, special occasion? Sure, no problem. Okay, when we traveled to Portugal a few months ago, I had a drink with my wife on one of the evenings where we went to a nicer restaurant. Did I enjoy the feeling in the moment? Of course, I did. Did it undo everything? No. Did I go back to drinking as a habit? No, of course not. Like I said, no purity test here. I haven't had a drink since, but this isn't a religion. So to me, it's no big deal. I'm still happy with where I'm at. If I had to do it all over again, would I drink when I did? Now, you might be surprised to hear me say this, but yes, I would. I try not to live my life fretting and regretting past decisions, but even looking back with the sober eyes of today, pun intended, I still would have drank when I was in college. I know now that it is worse for me than I thought. I'm sure I would drink a lot less, but I would still drink. And the reason is obvious. It's because of the social impact. Okay, so many of the good times, so many of the great friendships that I still enjoy today, some of the best times that we had, whether it was at a bachelor party in New Orleans or going on trips to Cancun, a lot of those trips involved drinking. Might I have had as good a time or maybe even a better time without alcohol? I think it's theoretically possible. Maybe with a different friend group, maybe in different circumstances, quite possible. But looking back on it, yes, I would drink. I had a great time with my wife before we were married. I think I would. I'm quite confident that I would. But I would drink less. I would go in eyes open. And I think more so than maybe 20 years ago, much more information is known, or at least known in the sort of the public zeitgeist, about how bad alcohol really is for you. If I were advising my child, say if they're in college today, and they're not, but they're in college today, what would I tell them? I would say, understand that alcohol is a tool, but it is a dangerous tool. It's a tool that can open some doors for you socially, but it's definitely not a tool to overuse. And overuse is a much, much lower barrier than what I understood from 20 years ago, and that most of us understand today. Will this be an issue for my children if they choose to go to college? Well, I don't know. I mean, honestly, I'm optimistic. I do see a sea change on the subject of alcohol, in which so many people are just cutting it out, giving it up, finding other interesting and exciting things to do that don't involve alcohol. So I am incredibly optimistic about the future. But if I had to do it all over again, would I consume alcohol when I did? I'm going to be honest with you. Yes, I would. I would. Okay, we're going to actually wrap for this episode today. As always, thank you for the listen. I've thoroughly enjoyed this episode, as all of the episodes. If you also enjoyed the episode, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the show on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or just wherever you like listening to podcasts. If you have 30 seconds and would like to rate and review the show, that would really mean a lot to me. Okay, it helps out the show a lot. These subjects are incredibly important to me. I'm just incredibly passionate about it. And getting more ratings and shares and views and downloads and all that good stuff will help us spread this show far and wide. So thanks again, and I'll see you next time.